Hi, welcome to another Digital Marketing Answered. I'm Tim Butler, founder and CEO of Innovation Visual. And with this podcast, we aim to provide marketing and revenue leaders with informative and interesting information. So if you enjoy it, you like it, please do like and subscribe, whatever platform you're using. And please, if you also leave us a review, it will help others discover this content. So on the subject of content, today's topic that we're going to be chatting about is finding the most profitable segments in your data. And today I'm really happy to be joined by Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hi Tim, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Many of the people listening may know who you are, but for those that are new to the podcast, please just introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name's Chris and I'm the MarTech Manager here at Innovation Visual. So I oversee all things to do with data and CRMs and automation and all those good things. So I'm going to be here today helping walk through this minefield really of how to segment your data and drive some profit from it.
Okay, well, that's a good way of starting it. So, bit of a minefield. Let's just before we start tiptoeing across that, just describe what we're actually talking about in terms of both data, because there's masses of data floating around now of lots of different types. So, we're going to focus down a bit on particular types of data, and what we also mean by segmentation.
Okay, so when we're talking about data in this context, we're really thinking about your first party data, your owned data, which hopefully is stored in a CRM, or maybe it's in your email marketing tool, potentially database, spreadsheet, that sort of thing. But hopefully you've got it stored in a centralized location of some sort. And that should be made up of your prospects, your customers, and all the other little bits of data that might go along with that. So if you're B2B, you might also have company information in there, but it is essentially data that you have access to, that you have earned and you own on your own platforms.
Yeah.
And we're going to use that to drive these segments. So the segments will vary depending on your business model, depending on your industry and your sector. These segments will vary, but they will basically be ways of splitting out your audience, finding commonalities across your database that gives you either similar customer journeys, similar product affinities, ways of grouping that data together so that you can send out relevant information, personalized comms, target people at the right time, and send them content that is going to engage them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, very thorough, very thorough. Okay, so I'm just going to unpack a little bit of that. First party data, this is getting really important now, isn't it? Because what we would term third party data, which is data that's held externally. So an example of third party data might be targeting information on something like the Meta platform or Google. Yeah.
Mm. Yep.
That's becoming more problematic, isn't it? So first party data is something which people really need to be focusing quite a lot of attention on, would you say?
I would. Whether we're talking about a kind of cookieless future or whether we're talking about literally just owning the data, as in you have full access to it. If you are kind of reliant on whether it be Meta or Google or anyone like that, all you need is kind of a change of their policies or a change of EU legislation that suddenly you can't get access to the kind of data you previously
Yeah.
could, or you can't
Or a
quite,
change of price, or a change of
change of
pricing.
pricing. Absolutely. Or even thinking, Google shifting from Google Analytics Universal to GA4, there were certain things that changed that made it harder to pull out certain types of reports. And, probably rightfully so, there has been a move towards this kind of anonymized data within those sorts of tools, which for us as a consumer is a really positive thing. As a marketer or a salesperson, it is much harder then to look at mass volumes of anonymized data and understand individual behaviors, build segments, and understand how to best market or sell to those people.
Yeah.
When we've got first party data, and we'll talk a little bit about what makes up different types of those data, you've got the ability to really look at data that has been provided to you either directly by the consumer, or potentially we could be looking at things like buying lists or data enrichment. But we're talking about data that you have as a set in stone data point that you can iterate on, test, use to build out segments, and see if you can continue to enrich that data through further touch points, which again, we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah. And I think when we were discussing kind of the subject matter, we do understand the importance actually of a lot of machine learning, which some people might term AI in this context, running against data pools. We're not going to talk so much about that because we decided that was going to be such a massive subject that it probably needs its own episode, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly. I think when it comes to whether we're talking enrichment of data, whether we're talking capture of data, there are a number of different ways that we can start to talk about how you get data and how you use it and how you split it out. But realistically, there are only a limited number of ways that you can actually start to rely on that data. So if we start by talking a little bit about the different types of data that we could have within our database. So at a very, very top level, we're going to have this split of implicit or explicit data.
Can you give me those?
This is kind of,
can you give us those definitions just for those that
aren't sure. So
if you have
data that's explicit, essentially all we're saying is that has been voluntarily given to you. So the owner of that data, if you like, has literally gone to a form or filled out a database to say, my name is Tim Butler and I am CEO of Innovation Visual. Those would be explicit data points that have been absolutely written down in stone. The implicit side of that data would be, and there is always going to be kind of logical jumps and assumptions in some of this, but the implicit side of that would be to look between the lines of those data points that you've been given, as well as behavioral data, and start to extrapolate that out to try and understand more about, in this case, Tim Butler, the CEO. So, for example, you could potentially say, right, Tim Butler, we're going to implicit data, and that is that he's male. Again, it's an assumption, and there are better examples of this, but you could start to extrapolate that out. And we would also look at like the behavior of that individual. So what kind of content they consume, what web pages they visited, maybe what the referral is that's brought them in, to really understand other elements of their journey that perhaps they haven't necessarily written down as an explicit piece of data. So implicit, very much reading between the lines and extrapolating.
Yeah. So it could be something like, I read a blog on how to use AI to make my website content more personalized, and I didn't actually fill out a form and say I'm interested in website personalization, but by reading that article, you're saying, okay, the implicit position on that, and we will capture that, is that Tim's interested in website personalization.
Absolutely. And I think you take that implicit data and you use it to kind of map out customer journeys, but as part of that customer journey, you continue the enrichment process. So you continue to test and validate that implicit data. So if we start sending you content around using AI to enrich out your website and things, and you continue to engage with that, click calls to action, fill in more forms, download more content, we can continue to validate that, yes, that is correct. That implicit data is more and more true about that individual. And likewise, if there is no engagement, you can kind of sideways shift away from that implicit data and say, well, perhaps that first assumption was wrong.
Okay. So we want to talk about finding the most profitable segments in your data. Before we can start doing that, we need to have the platform and the data in, should we say, I think we'll call it good order. So let's start first of all with platform and data unification. If you can explain a little bit about what needs to happen there.
Yeah, so as you say, when you're looking to build out segments, you've got to be able to understand what data you actually have. So having a platform, a CRM that can surface data in a way that is actually usable, that can actually be used to build out, whether it's lists, whether it's audiences, whether it's segments, whatever the platform refers to those segments as, you need to have a system that is going to allow you to do that. So we work with a few different systems, and HubSpot is a CRM that we're partners with, and we often use that with some of our clients. But it's by no means the only option in this case. But it allows you to take any data point against any contact and use that to build out a rule, if you like, a rules-based list. So if we were looking for a certain age group with certain profession types, we'd be able to use those cross-sectioned as rules to pull out that list. And that is where having a platform of some type is really important, because when we're talking about building segments, we're going to make the assumption that we're working with a database that is big enough that it's just not physically possible for someone to be manually categorizing people and making these decisions. And we always want to be designing these processes to be scalable, because ultimately that's what we want to do. We want to be able to drive people through a customer journey in a scalable fashion so that we can continue to grow the business. So that's the first thing. That's the platform.
Yeah.
And I think it's
just because before you go on there, one of the things is about data can exist in different areas of the business. Can you just touch on the importance of bringing the data together? Because I'm thinking, say you're B2B and you've got should we say, an invoicing system that's got the information about how much you're billing particular clients, or you're a consumer platform and you've got purchase order data in an e-commerce system. So can you just touch on the importance of data centralization?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, when you look at segmentation as a principle, you often kind of revert to thinking about prospects and leads, and you forget the full customer cycle. And actually, when you think about a customer journey from end to end, if you like, we are essentially thinking about someone going from a lead through to potentially a customer and beyond. And across each of those platforms, you might have things like customer success or customer support comms. So potentially someone's operating something like Zendesk, and in there they've got vital information about the actual adoption and use of your product or service that the sales and marketing team might be completely oblivious to. So sales and marketing have sold in a product or service, but actually there's been nothing but complaints and confusion coming in. And off the back of that, in a really well built out system, you will be able to feed back that into the system and use it as a way to continue to nurture people, to develop better content, and use that as a way of also mapping out segments of people that are prime for renewals, cross sells, upsells, people who need further nurture, customers who are churning, all these sorts of things. Regardless of your business model, customers are going to go through a journey with you. And ultimately, if you can have all of that information in one place, you can continue to be segmenting your audience well through their journey with you as an actual customer, not just as a lead. And that should incorporate customer services, sales, marketing, and potentially other back office systems that you have, depending on the structure of your business.
Yeah. So I suppose this is where the magic that we've been doing with connecting disparate APIs for systems really comes in, where there isn't necessarily a native integration that you can get like a HubSpot Salesforce one, but you've got a slightly left field system, but it's got an API. People want to pull the data in, and we've been helping them do that, because I do like the term data lake, and I appreciate that for some of the the less large, should we say, clients, it could be a data pool, but it's still, I think there's so much value in it actually bringing all that data into a singular space for what you're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when we're talking about driving value from data, we all know that often your easiest conversions and your lowest hanging fruit will be things like existing customers with cross sells and upsells. And realistically, if you've built a system or a process where there is this disparate disconnection between the point of sale and then the ongoing journey of the customer, then your sales team aren't going to know that there is an opportunity there to pounce on those existing customers. So, when we're talking about value, there is absolutely a number of segments that can be mapped out for existing customers.
Yeah. Okay. So, I was just going to ask you a little bit about auditing data then, but I suppose there's kind of my reluctance is because there's kind of two parts to this. There's auditing the data, but there's also auditing the technology.
Yep.
Which comes first on that one, the chicken or the egg, in terms of checking what's what?
I suppose with the technology, as long as there is enough clarity to be able to see the data, you can start to think about your segments. We've already spoken there about kind of the nature of having a disparate tech stack and this disconnect from one part of the business to another. That is, of course, really important. And I think given the work we've done recently with quite a few of our clients, there is almost always opportunity for better connection, whether it be across the classic of marketing and sales, or whether it be deeper into customer success or customer service. And I think absolutely that should be a priority, but also it might not be the quickest route to driving value from your data. So if you already have a pool of data sat ready to be segmented, I would probably argue that getting that started and starting to build out segments with data that you can start to test, you can start to use, you can start to try and drive people through some customer journeys is going to be adding value immediately, whether they be prospects and leads or whether they be customers. I think that's really important. And if you've got kind of other systems that can be connected in, start to further enrich that data, then that's great. And I think, this to some extent is always going to be an iterative process, because it's your segments and your customers and your audiences will evolve and they will change with you, with your products and your services. So this isn't just a kind of a one and done situation. It's kind of always being on top of your data, always understanding and always trying to be better. Because realistically, when we talk about segmenting data, the key driver for me is improving conversion of the data you already have. We'll talk a bit about enrichment of data and about new and old data, but realistically, when we're segmenting data, it's because we want to be better at personalization. We want to be better at the timing of our sales and marketing. And all of that comes down to just continually improving the quality of your data, enriching that data. So I would say, long story short, is to get started with what you have, and start getting and auditing that data and understanding that data, because that will help you understand where your gaps are.
Okay, so you talked about auditing data and quality of data. You've also mentioned age of data. So, okay, I'm a marketing leader. Maybe I'm new to the organization, and they go, yeah, we've got 18,000 customer records or prospect records in the CRM. What's the next stage? How do you actually audit and understand what's going on there?
Yeah, so you would have to start by looking at what kind of marketing and sales activities had currently been undertaken, because that 18,000 are potentially sat there not being contacted at all, which is not uncommon, or they are being contacted and therefore we have some historical data that we can start to understand how well that data is performing. So our first point of contact is to go, great, you've got 18,000 contacts. How many of them are actually engaged with your brand? So some of that's going to be understanding how they've engaged over the past 6 months to a year. And again, that length will depend on the business structure and how fast a sales cycle is, for example.
Yeah.
But it's also going to be looking at where have they come from? Have we got 10,000 that have been bought in on a list 20 years ago and have moved from one database and system CRM to another? Or are these all people that have come to a website and have filled in forms? Because that makes a big difference, not just in terms of things like GDPR and the right to contact them, but in terms of, do these people actually know your brand? Do they want to hear from you? Are they going to respond well to marketing and sales? So that's the first thing, really, is understanding essentially where this data has come from.
Okay. And so let's say we understand where the data's come from and it is relatively fresh.
Mhm.
So, because I know you mentioned has stuff been sitting there, not been contacted for a significant period of time. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that we don't have to do those re-engagement campaigns, we don't have to do, a big database cleaning exercise, and we're kind of skipping over that for speed, and obviously quite often those things do need to be done. Like
Yeah.
if you don't know what's happened with that data, you can't identify it, and it hasn't been contacted, you've got to really do a proper re-engagement campaign. But let's say you've got that set and you start looking at it and you start getting excited about finding the most profitable segments. How do you start looking in that data then,
Yeah.
to move towards our objective at this point?
So there's a couple of things here. So the first thing it says, you can't build a segment with data you don't have. So a segment really needs to align with both the reality of what data you have, but also the business goals of what you're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So when we look at the alignment of this data, we've got to think about how is it that we actually want to be able to use the information we're going to pull from this. So are there certain types of campaigns we're looking to run? Do we have certain types of content that we know we can use? Because if we decide, right, we're going to pull out a certain group of people who have engaged in with a particular seasonal campaign,
Yeah.
that makes sense if we've got the collateral to follow up with it. If perhaps it's another seasonal campaign we're going to be following up with again this year, or if it's a cyclical thing. But if we decided we want to pull out a specific bit of data, I don't know, maybe it was a geographical thing, but actually that has no bearing on the product and service we offer, then it's not a useful data point. But it also might hinder us from actually putting campaigns together because we haven't got anything particularly different that's going to service those different segments. So ultimately, there's not really any point in building out 4 or 5 segments that when we then start to put them through different journeys and different campaigns,
Right.
we end up servicing the same content because actually we didn't have anything to differentiate
Okay.
them. So when we
Okay.
start to look through this, we need to be able to pull out information that we know we have, and we need to start thinking about the sizes of our segments. So as a general rule, a bigger segment might drive more value just in total, but it might convert at a lower rate because it's not as personalized. It hasn't got, you know, hasn't got the quite
Okay.
same relevance to it. Whereas a smaller segment might not drive as much revenue totally, but hopefully it'll be more specific, more targeted, and more convert better. So we've got to think
Okay.
about that in terms of what data we have.
That's really interesting, given what you said a moment ago about also there's no point creating loads of segments if you don't have the time and energy to be able to create specific content for those segments.
Hmm.
So really, if people are on a journey of segmentation and making specific journeys for specific segments, specific comms for specific segments, they actually need to sort of start probably looking at it maybe a little bit broader so that they've got coverage of their data. And then would you say then start going into narrower and narrower segments to then break it down so that we drive up conversion rates, so total revenue will increase, but you've got yourself, if you like, the coverage?
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think the other benefit of that is it gives you the ability to do a bit of testing. So if you are new to targeting this database through marketing campaigns, or whether this is just a new approach in general to using this database, it may well be, going back to the data hygiene issue before, that this is an opportunity to do a bit of testing. And we do want to be able to do that on volume. So we do want to be able to
Right.
start contacting the broader database fairly quickly so that we can start to get some feedback. And
Yeah.
it's also a good opportunity to start enriching the data. So if we go back to
Okay.
quickly just
So
to
I'm just
how
gonna
we would,
I'll stop you before the enrichment. The other thing is I'm thinking is remembering my many moons ago degree courses on statistics. It's easier to get the surety of the test if you've got a bigger data set, I'm guessing, isn't it here?
Yeah,
So because you were
absolutely.
saying we've got to know, whether A or B works on the A/B testing. If you've got a database of 1,000 people, that's harder to be statistically sure about that compared with a database of 1 million people.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So when you've got those big numbers, you can actually see the effect of whether it's an A/B test or whether you're actually running people through different touch points within a nurture campaign. You can actually see the impact of each individual change that you want to test, and I think that is
Yeah.
important.
Okay. So sorry, I interrupted you. You were about to tell us about enrichment. So
Well, yeah. So what I was going to say is, obviously, when we go back to that initial data hygiene and the segmentation side, one of the things that is likely to come out of the data is that there will be gaps. Unfortunately, as marketers, we often don't have the perfect picture of all of our prospects and customers. We get little snapshots of their journeys as they go along, initial form conversions, first purchases, things like that. But there are always gaps in these journeys that we would love to have more information on our prospects and our customers. If we talk about running these larger initial segments through kind of first nurture campaigns, if you like, we start to create more touch points where we can gather more explicit data. So, whether that be in an e-commerce environment, capturing things like date of birth to run birthday campaigns, or whether it be in a B2B environment, more things like trying to enrich things like job titles or industries, start to get a better picture of who these people are. We can slowly gather the information that allows us to then drill down to those smaller segments with data that we can be fairly sure is going to be genuine. People
okay,
tend not to go in and put in joke birth dates, but you never know.
yeah. So when it comes to enrichment, we need to understand what are we trying to do with the data. So the date of birth, or the birthday data point is really interesting because that's pretty obvious in terms of that's your birthday. You can run an automation against a month before the birthday or whatever it is, send them a voucher code, whatever you choose to do. But on something more complex, like asking them about leisure preferences or something like that, it's only relevant to actually gather those data points if we're really going to use it.
Yeah, exactly. I think whilst I'm sure people could read between the lines and pull information out about whether or not they're going to be a high income family based on their brand preferences in completely different sectors, it really is kind of pushing the limit as to what's useful within your data. So I would say absolutely, we want nice frictionless touch points for our customers. We want them to want to just flow through a customer journey with us. So only ask them for things we really think we're going to use and we think are important, because we don't want to hamper conversion rates on this journey just for the sake of gathering who their favorite football team is, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few ways to enrich data. Can you just explain to people listening some of the sort of the headlines around how they can go about enriching it?
Yeah, so we spoke there about kind of designing a customer journey around gathering explicit data through additional touch points. So that would be the most kind of organic way of doing it. We've also got the connecting of systems. So making sure that we have got that interplay between customer services, sales, marketing, make sure we actually have all of that information in a single source of truth. I think that's really important, but not always the easiest or simplest process to go through. And that's where someone like Innovation Visual can really help guide you through that kind of change of your entire setup and your processes. I think that's a key one. There are tools that you can use. So we can talk about in B2B, there are obviously things like business insights tools, things that can really start to bring information purely against things like email domains. So if we're talking B2B, there are a number of different ways that we can start to use the company element of an individual to start to really enrich them. We also obviously have tools like LinkedIn, and all of this can be used to start to gather more and more information on an individual. So in a B2B environment, it's usually quite a a rich vein that can be tapped to start to really build up a richer picture at an account level. So, we don't just need to understand Tim Butler, the CEO. We don't want to understand the full innovation visual picture and understand who the right people are within that decision-making unit. So that in some ways is an easier thing to start to build out. In a B2C environment, you are much more reliant on either the explicit data from the contact or just the behavioural data. And that's where, particularly if we're talking e-commerce, where there is a lot of browsing of products and basket abandonment and so on, we can start to gauge that behaviour in terms of who is this person. And actually, within that, there will be subsegments of actual basket abandoners. It's almost not product specific. It's just that's their behavior and they are in some sort of research phase, and therefore that's a segment rule. So, and that behavioral data becomes kind of your best friend with the B2C world, because that is going to be a broader section of data than we're likely to have got directly from the consumer.
Yeah. I mean, I think almost the discussion's going to branch a little bit here, because going down the B2B versus B2C routes, there are some differences. So let's just go down the B2C route for a minute and think about things like e-commerce, and actually getting down to the nuggets, if you like, of gold in this podcast, the most profitable segments. For me, and I think you'd agree, the value is in tying in all of the purchase behavior and the on-site behavior to what you know to an individual, and then moving that forward. Would you say so?
Yes, I would. And I think I would take that a step further in terms of, we talked a little bit about system integration a moment ago. This is where, from an e-commerce point of view, being able to understand things like where your high margins are with your products is also really important. Because if we talk product affinity, and you've got, for argument's sake, you only sell two products and one has a 40% margin and one has a 5% margin, the product affinity to the 40% margin is going to be key to unlocking value in your segments.
And you've really hit on something there, which I always talk about when I'm talking publicly or to prospective clients or clients about this kind of stuff, that you need to start actually overlaying things like profitability of business, whether it be business like lines, so categories of products, or whether it be individual products or other elements, to really get to the profit. Because I've seen it before where people get really excited about, like, oh yeah, we did X amount more revenue, and it's when you actually calculate out the profit, it's not that great. And I suppose a bit of a bugbear of mine is discounting, isn't it? So I'm just gonna go off on one here now, but so on the finding the most profitable segments in your data, one of the ones that isn't the most profitable is identifying that segment that only buy when they get a discount, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because those aren't going to give you that high absolute profit coming into the bank. Flipping that around, though, if we're saying, okay, these are the discount hounds, they're the ones that only buy from us, and we can identify that because we've put our e-commerce data into the CRM, we've got a single source of truth. What's the flip side of that? Who are the ones that we should be hunting down then, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think essentially it's a similar kind of journey to those serial discount hunters. It will be looking at the people who, whether it be have made multiple purchases, whether it's the ones that have made high value purchases, or like we said before with the high margin, it's understanding not just the segmentation of your customers and your prospects, but also how that reacts to the services and the products that you're offering. So it might well be that you have somebody that comes back to you on a particular cadence, So, they make an annual purchase, for example. How do you weigh up the value of someone who's been with you for 10 years making small purchases against someone who's only ever made a single purchase at a higher value?
Yeah.
Realistically, that cadence is an important part of how we can not just understand that particular contact, but start to think about how we nurture the high value
Yeah.
single purchaser as well. And a lot of the time, it's understanding that those two people are distinct segments just because of their actual spending habits, not just the pricing. Um, and then understanding how to nurture those separately. So, in terms of how we pick out individual segments, of course, it will vary for different businesses, but I think these are the things that we need to be splitting out. It's kind of the frequency of the purchase, the value of the purchase, even just literally the number of items in the basket. Are these people that, when they go and buy a barbecue, they buy the tongs, they buy the coals, they buy the cover,
Yeah.
because a lot of the time these are the big value adds, right? The
Yeah.
additionals around the side. And I think it shows a propensity of someone who wants to spend with your brand.
Yeah.
They're fully bought in, they're fully invested, and they are kind of open to buying more, would be, an
Yeah.
obvious thought for me. So it's about understanding how there is a difference between those different types of buyers and the
Yeah.
decisions that they make.
Yeah, yeah. That's really I like the distinction that you draw. So rather than just simply looking at consumers in a bucket of lifetime spend, you're actually saying, well, that's one thing, but actually does that spend occur with a single transaction or multiple
Mm.
transactions over a period? And actually that's a different behavior. And obviously, there's lots of people listening from different areas and different businesses and all of that. So, it's hard for us to say it's them or it's them, but I think what we're really saying here is that you really need to think about your customers and your prospects and those transactions in the light of your business and your business model, because some people have recurring revenue business models. Some people sell a product that it runs out in a month's time, so that's a very
Mm.
different thing to say selling something which is furniture or a high value car or something like that. These can be quite different things. So it's really, we need to start examining the consumer's behaviors and their revenue and their profit and their metrics again in the light of a business model, in the light of your the marketeer's specific business. How does that impact them? Is there a benefit in different areas?
Yeah, I think so. We can extrapolate that out a bit as well, because you can start to think about certain types of purchases and certain services, like you said, recurring revenue models, products that have particular lifespans. So if we know a product has a lifespan of a year,
Yeah.
then by all means, we should be thinking about that nurture journey being 1 year long and making sure that the subsequent purchase is kicked in. But there are
Yeah.
also kind of implicit versions of that. So maybe a stationer gets a transaction through for wedding invites. Well, they
Yeah.
know that there's a particular journey that consumer is going to go on, where there'll be things like thank you cards to follow up, and there are certain things that you can start to push down
Yeah.
that route, in the knowledge that you know exactly what stage of life they're in, you know exactly what sort of things they're going to be looking for. And
Yeah.
if you want to take it really, further, you can start thinking about what do people traditionally do following their marriages, and you can
Yes.
imagine the routes you could start doing with that. So
Yeah.
it gives you a lot of options to start going, let's think about what is most likely going to engage with someone who has made that
Yeah.
particular purchase at this point.
Yeah, I like that idea of thinking about what the potential follow-on purchases could be. The
Yeah.
other thing, even without the life journey thing, which you can, it almost seems obvious. Oh, well, if they do X, they're going to send a thank you card afterwards or whatever. But there's other things, isn't there? Because you could actually look at your purchase behaviors, and you talk about the barbecues as an example, and it would be interesting for a company selling barbecues and outdoor leisure items to actually map how many people that bought let's say barbecue X, bought follow-on products down the line, not necessarily in the same basket, but down the line? And are there correlations to be seen between certain the purchase of certain items and certain follow-on items? Because that's a profitable segment to tap into, isn't it?
It is, and I suspect as well it is a segment that is the most cannibalized by the Amazon model, i.e. people might go to a specialist for the original barbecue purchase, but will happily buy the cheaper accessories later on from Amazon. So I
Yeah.
think that in itself is an area where the profitable nature of that segment is that you need to keep them within your journey, keep them
Yeah.
buying from your company.
Yeah. So if they bought a barbecue and they didn't buy the tongs, the follow-up email is, hey, we've got an offer on tongs, or look at our range of tongs, or whatever it is. Look at our barbecue coals, firelighters, whatever it is. So you keep them within your circle. I mean, that takes us on to so it's B2C, but it's also B2B as well, in terms of lapsed and dormant customers. Now, talking about profitability, I know you've done some work around these groupings for clients. Can you explain why lapsed and dormant you think are good opportunities for profitability?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, we're talking about people that they already know your brand, they already know the product or the service, and people always quote different figures. Some say it's 5 times, some say it's 25 times easier to convert an existing customer or someone that already knows your brand. So
Yeah.
these are people that, assuming they haven't been completely disenfranchised by their original their original touch point with you, these are people
Yeah.
that already know your brand, already know your offering, potentially won't be surprised to see an email popping up in their inbox. And if we can ensure that our data supports the segmentation of these people correctly, then we can
Yeah.
start to understand, are these people that have gone cold because it was a budget choice? Are these people that have gone cold because they've defected to a competitor? You can
Yeah.
start to really understand, why are they in that segment? And is it something that we can salvage, essentially? Is it something that
Yeah.
we can bring back? And going back to the B2B world, this is where we could start to have, maybe a salesperson's made a call and they've had, they've been told no, they've got the cold shoulder. Maybe they've managed to gather a little bit of information, or no, they've moved to competitor X and we know their renewals next June. Might be gold dust, might be hard to get that information. But
Yeah.
actually, if you can capture that kind of information, it means that you can start to use your systems to automate the processes to
Yeah.
start to have that conversation next June. So you understand that they might be back in market come next June, and
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully understand what differentiates you from your competitor to know how to sell yourselves back in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so lapsed cold customers, potentially ones that bought 5 years ago and you've not heard from them since.
Yeah.
That plays back to what we were just saying about understanding from their original purchase potentially why they wouldn't have bought from us since,
Yeah.
depending on the product or the business model that you're working with.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think this ties back into looking at first party data as this mine of opportunity. And I find it really surprising that sometimes we go into prospective customers and they haven't had the mindset, or they haven't been shown the way by anybody, whether that be an agency or internally, to say, do you realize how much gold you've got sitting here? Lapsed and dormant customers, that example where you say, if you capture the renewal date of an agreement, that's a massive win to then automate bringing them back at a certain date. It's really important to do that. So yeah, very interesting. We've talked around a lot of bits and pieces. There's one, I mean, we talked about segments, about lifetime value, lifetime profit, those kind of things, the upsell, cross sells, the margins on products. Yeah, one of the ones we actually haven't mentioned is where actually I think it's an opportunity people don't often look at, is the low cost of acquisition clients. So actually looking if you're capturing where clients are being won in a specific channel or for a specific product grouping, and then you can develop that into a high lifetime value. People often don't look at what could be that, if you like, not necessarily lost leader, but that lead-in product to a group that costs you a lot less to go into, particularly with the cost of paid media rising and rising.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, that kind of raises the whole point of segmentation for the point of reporting. So, we've really only talked about segmentation for marketing and sales activities, but actually, to just understand your data better and be able to pull those commonalities all the way through. So, little things like, do people that have come from paid media campaigns spend more? Do people from social media spend more? To understand that means that you
Yeah,
can make better future decisions based on those rules. And it might be
yeah,
that you cross segment that against other demographics or other behaviors, but
yeah,
realistically that information in itself helped you make better decisions in your spend.
yeah, yeah. Interestingly, you mentioned behaviors there. We've got a guest coming up on DMA, Symanto, which Innovation Visual work with their behavioural insights, which I think I just teared up so people do listen, because it's too much to go into, and we've got a whole episode coming up on it. But actually understanding, and this is the power of AI in this case, creating segments based around personality and behavioural types. I mean, it really is the next level, and it's not something that every business can afford. But I suppose what we've been doing up to now is we've been implicitly or implying certain behaviors based off things, and certainly we're Symanto and our work with them has shown that you can go deeper into that.
Yeah.
So I've kind of trailered that, but I don't want to spoil that. I think it's probably time that we try and wrap this up a bit. Just to go back to the foundation bits in terms of the starting point, then just quickly, starting point, somebody's maybe new in a role, they want to find the most profitable segments in the data. What are those steps that they should take?
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing is just to fully understand what data you have. So size of the database, how many data points you actually have against them, and depending on the business model, be looking for critical things like, do we have things like their product affinity or their purchase history? Because that is realistically going to be one of the fundamentally most interesting things we'll know about a customer or a prospect. What product or service do they actually want from us? So that's where I would start, is just dive into the data, start looking for the sizes of different segments. It might literally just start with some experimentation of pulling some segments out and saying how big certain segments are and where there are gaps in the data. And that can take the route of just sit there going, I would like to do X. Do I have that data? No, I don't. Okay, how can I get that data? So the next step is then building your activities, whether that be nurturing campaigns, marketing activities, newsletters, whatever it might be, building those out in a way that is going to provide touch points and subsequent touch points that can help to start enriching your data. So really start to say, okay, I don't have birth dates at the moment. I do want to be able to run birthday campaigns. How can I capture birthdays? And run that campaign to start enriching your data. And I think from there, it is a snowball effect of just, actually, I know what I want to get to. I need to go there step by step and start to get more and more data in there.
Yeah. Okay. Good summary. Good to pick it up with you. If people want to get in touch with you, Chris, and the MarTech team, because they just want to run some ideas, bash you, pick your brains on this sort of stuff, how should they do that?
They can jump on the website and fill in a form. They can ping something across to us, and anyone in the team would be really excited to talk to you about all things segmentation. And we've got some really exciting stuff we're working on around that enrichment piece, and starting to bring in more technologies that just make this all more streamlined and more kind of precise in terms of what it is that we're trying to help companies do. So yeah, absolutely. Jump on the website,
Perfect.
come and say hi, and we'll be happy to talk to you.
Perfect. Sounds really good. That's great. And yeah, I think it's time that we wrapped it up. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention to listen. Hope it's been useful. As Chris says, please do reach out to us if you need anything. But if you've enjoyed the podcast, the Digital Marketing Answered episode, please do subscribe so you get all the future ones, and please do also review and rate us so it helps other people discover our content. So until next time, thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And Chris, thank you for being the guest today.
Thank you so much.